Today's keynote speaker has devoted his life to environmental philosophy and the impacts of community leadership. Jared L. Talley is a doctoral candidate and engaged philosopher at Michigan State University with a focus on environmental philosophy and policy. He is a multi-generation Idahoan, growing up with a close connection to the rivers, mountains, and landscapes, which help foster a deep appreciation for the responsible governance of the natural world. His research areas are in the philosophy of an environmental governance, concentrating on the roles of science and community collaboration in environmental policy and management. Jared is focused on the better understanding of how diverse communities construct relationships to their environments, how policy programs interpret and manage for these relationships, and how the nature of the ecological sciences provides opportunities and obstacles for environmental management. With that, please help me welcome Jared Talley.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm loud. Thank you for having me out here. I'm a country boy from Idaho. This is a very weird thing being out here with everyone here listening to me. I grew up in southwestern Idaho, and I worked at a lumber yard for a long time, and in mid-2000s we all saw that housing market crash, right? And I figured I need to find another career. And so I went to a community college, got an associate's degree, and I said, well, this is fun. So I went and got a bachelor's, and I said, well, this is fun. And so I went and got a master's in resource management and policy, and then I made a decision, good or bad, we'll see, to go do a PhD. So I moved over to Michigan and been working on environmental philosophy. But my heart is in the West, and I think I have to hit this. Oh, there we go. My heart is in the West. So my environmental philosophy focuses on the West, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But I was trying to figure out what I wanted to talk to you about today, because I do a lot of different things. It's like, what do they want to hear? But I decided I'm a philosopher, so I'm going to talk about something weird. How about the imagination, right? We all have an imagination, and we think about it, some more than others, but that's all right. And let's talk about how that imagination affects our ability to collaborate. So I said, well, let me just lean into being a philosopher and do something different. So today we're going to talk about imagination and collaboration. But first, I want to start with a slide, but I don't think it's working here. Oh, there we go. Okay. I want to start with this quote from Wallace Stegner, because when you think about why you do what you're doing, it's hard to put that into one or two sentences. And for me, Wallace Stegner did this really well. So I lean into this one because this explains why I do what I do. Angry as one may be at what heedless men have done and still do to a noble habitat, one cannot be pessimistic about the West. This is the native home of hope. When it fully learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has a chance to create a society to match its scenery. And one thing I really like about this is, especially in conservation or any sort of environmental management, we often focus on the environment, but this is directly saying, no, the people matter too. And in fact, in that system, in that calculation, the people are the hardest part. We can figure out the environment real easily. We've got the tools now. It's the people. And so I've devoted my studies to understanding the people. And I like what that says here, and especially that line, when it fully learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism. We have to cooperate, and we do, but maybe not as well as we want to. And we've learned some bad habits sometimes that prevent us from cooperating. So I wanted to think about that. So let me talk about what I do. Okay, let's go to the next one here. There we go. Let's talk about what I do specifically. So I'm an engaged philosopher, which means I do think about things philosophically. I think there's big questions that we need to answer when we come to problems and obstacles. We need to think about them sometimes differently than we've been trained to think about them. But that engaged piece matters a lot here. There's people in this room that I've worked with in my capacity as a philosopher because I think putting boots on the ground is really important. We can't be sitting back in a chair and saying, well, I can solve the world's problems from this chair. It's like, no, you need to be putting boots on the ground. So I'm an engaged philosopher because I do. I try to go into communities and help. I also have a master's in policy and management, and I always think about how environmental policy and management, especially in the West, impacts the decisions we make. BLM, I'm sure a lot of people know the BLM, if not everybody here, is mandated to follow FLPMA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976, which gives a laundry list. I mean, it's like 40 different things they have to manage for. And every one of those things has a different environmental value attributed to it. And how do we balance all of those when we're making decisions? So I think about how that balance works, and then I look at culture and rhetoric. I look at how our songs, like the actual songs that we listen to, what they say about what we believe. I look about the language that we use when we describe our practices and what that says about what we believe. And I do all this in the context of the West. The red lands up there are federally managed lands, and we can see we're in the great state of Nevada that has the most federally managed lands in the lower 48. There's a lot of them out here. And when we make decisions on environmental decisions, we have to make them in this balanced way that's taking into account multiple different values. And so, of course, collaboration is going to be a big topic out here. It's a huge topic. And I don't know, I haven't been involved in many of these conversations outside of the West, but I would suppose it's probably a big topic elsewhere. But here in the West, it's especially important. And we can remember Wallace Stegner's quote, when we learn to cooperate, right? When we learn to collaborate, then we'll figure it out. But, okay, so that's kind of what I do at a broad scale, but what does my day-to-day look like, right? Let's go to the next one. I don't think this has worked, so I'm gonna have you guys do it. Let me tell you a story. I was driving around a while ago. I drive around a lot in the West, and I started recognizing fences, like really paying attention to fences. Maybe I should go back one second. I'm also a philosopher of technology. So just say here. I'm an environmental philosopher. I'm a philosopher of science, and I'm a philosopher of technology. I think about how technology impacts us as human beings. And fences are a piece of technology. And we have many different types of technologies. And as I'm driving around, I'm noticing fences, and I started noticing that certain fences only occur in certain areas. And there's a gradient from urban to sub-rural to rural. And each of these gradients have different fences. And I started thinking, well, that's interesting, why? And maybe it's just as easy as, well, those are the jobs that require those fences. But when I started researching it and thinking about it, it actually matches up really closely to environmental attitudes. From people, the general population in urban centers versus rural centers, and the two in between have different environmental attitudes, and they match up with these fences. And I have papers on this that we can start actually explaining how this technology is operating on something that is helping us to develop these environmental attitudes. And I said, well, what is that thing? What is the thing that is explaining why these fences match environmental attitudes across this, gradient? And it's the imagination. And it's a weird thing. The imagination, we all think about the imagination. We all have one. We imagine stuff all the time. But what do we actually do with it? Or what does it do for us? Oftentimes people, social scientists and philosophers say imagination is what separates us from any other living species. We have the unique capacity to imagine that no one else does. What is this thing doing for us? We can imagine seven-legged dogs, right? But that doesn't seem to matter in the world. But it turns out the imagination, let's go one more. There we go. The imagination is embroiled in this really complex cognitive process. And the imagination is not something that just happens in our head. It's something that happens in our body. When we go and we walk around a landscape and we move around a rock, we step over a stump, our body and our mind is imagining what we're doing, imagining that the floor is beneath me. If I didn't actually imagine the floor beneath me, it'd be really weird walking up here. Right? I have to actually my body has to know that there's things around me in order for me to move. And I'm telling this story. We'll get back to collaboration here in a second. So imagination is this weird thing that happens in your head and in your body. And you experience things on the landscape. You run into a fence, let's say, and you can either go through it in some fences or you have to go around it in some fences. You have these experiences, and these embodied experiences you'll see down here on the bottom left get taken up into your imagination, and they make patterns out of it. So like our experience of standing upright, or let's say even better, experience of piling up stones, we get this pattern that more is up. As more stones get piled, the pile or the level of the pile rises. More is up. It's a pattern. And then we use that pattern, our imagination extends that into other things in our life. Like, fill that cup up, right? It's like, that's a metaphor. It's why, how do those things connect? And it's our imagination connects it through these patterns. Now, these patterns all get tangled up in this big web, and it's called a conceptual tapestry. So every concept, everything we think about, when I say sagebrush, that concept of sagebrush, the person that hears it imagines it in a certain way. They use this conceptual tapestry that they've built off of their experiences, and imagination has done all this weird stuff, and then they understand what I mean when they say sagebrush. And then they use that understanding and they go act. And then when they act, they change things. They cut down a fence, they build a new one, something like that. And the new experience of that new change goes back into the circle and changes everything else again. Now, how does this play into anything, right? Why does this matter for fences? Let's go to the next one. So as I look across the West, I'm thinking about this all, and I'm a philosopher. I overthink everything, right? And I'm obviously overthinking fences at this point. I'm thinking about it, and I start actually looking at how different fences, and we're not going to do that specifically, but build different imaginations of the environment. What is the environment? That concept of the environment. What are we conserving? And it turns out that we actually, that urban-rural gradient has very different environmental conceptions. They actually imagine what the thing is differently than other people. Now, there's infinite types of imaginations, right? There is no finite amount, but there are 4 that operate in the West a lot. 4 different ways of imagining what the word environment means. One of those, in the top left, is environment as a machine. It's a machine. It's something like a car, where we can use it, we can fix it, we can tear it apart, we can put it back together. It's just for our use. It's just a machine. And that's a very common imaginary, is what we call them, a very common imaginary in the West. Another one at the top right is environment as home. When we say the environment, I imagine the environment as a home. It's a place I live. It's a place I want to make comfortable to live in. Just as we paint our walls in our home because it makes us more comfortable, we do things in the environment to make it more comfortable, but maybe we don't need to. You don't need painted walls in your home to live in your home, right? We want something that maybe we like to look at, but we also use. Rangelands are a very good example. We like healthy rangelands, but we also use them. The bottom left is a garden. Environment is garden. And this isn't like a food garden. This is like the European, like big English French gardens, the landscape gardens. Carefully manicured, not meant to actually be gone into, maybe very recreational. You go through there just to look at things and feel relaxed, but you don't actually use it. A lot of wilderness rhetoric follows this. We want our wilderness as a garden, as our recreational garden. And then on the bottom right, environment as family. And a lot of non-settler populations have this imaginary, right? Like trees are kin, their animals are kin. How would you treat the environment? Treat them as family. Develop relationships with these things. But these 4 different conceptions of the environment cannot be collapsed into the other. They are very distinct. And when you have people all around the West that we're trying to collaborate with, and you have them, and you don't know which one they're at, and you try to get them to talk together, we're going to have problems figuring out what decisions we need to make. So part of my job, and part of what I think about, like with fences, is to understand how people's environments that they're experiencing build certain imaginaries, and how those imaginaries, one of these 4 or more, compete with others when we're making decisions. So when I'm facilitating a collaboration, I can help understand what's going on and guide that. But now we need to go and take this to collaboration, because just thinking about imagination on its own is not enough. So let's quickly go through collaboration. I'll tell you some lessons I've learned as I do this and develop it and apply it. So let's go to the next one here. Power dynamics and asymmetrical relationships. So when we're building an imaginary, when we're talking to each other, we're building something in between, when we're trying to solve a problem, we need to focus on power dynamics and asymmetrical relationships. What this means, on the left, you have two happy people. This is a good situation. You have two people with the same shape, different colors. They talk, they build the same shape with the combined color. This is good. On the right, you have two colors, two shapes. They talk, one shape with multiple colors. What this is the person, the blue person in triangle on the one on the right, has inserted their power to form what the imaginary is. The person with the sad face, it's not a triangle anymore. Do you see this simple diagram to see what I'm talking about with power dynamics? And we will take this a little more detailed here in a second. Let's go to the next one. Elite and local. This is knowledges. So when we're talking about collaboration, I look at the local knowledge, the people in this room, and I look at elite knowledge. And those are the people that have gone, studied something, and they're expert in something, and they come in. What we're trying to do in a collaboration is build something in between that everybody is okay with. What we're not trying to do is the one on the bottom. We're not trying to overlap our imaginaries, because if we're not recognizing power dynamics, it turns out that we've got a purple triangle when we should have had a different shape. Because the way power works and we get expert knowledge, it just overlays on the local knowledge. And that's fine in some situations, but in collaboration, we need to build something together. So we need the one on the top. So let's go to the next one. And how do we do this? Now, there's a lot of things I'm brushing over, and I'd love to talk to anyone after this about what I'm brushing over. But how do we do this? Here's some actual takeaways that you can go apply in your own collaborations that we learn from studying the imagination. One, explicitly discuss language, experience, and imagination. Explicitly discuss how you imagine a landscape and the language you use to describe that. When you're facilitating a collaboration, don't let those things go assumed. Make sure that you are having that conversation, because oftentimes all it takes is recognizing that you're doing something different to come together. Ask why and not what. Why prompts us to give reasons for why I believe in something, or why I think this thing is the way it is. And I have to give reasons. And then oftentimes I can see, okay, that's why we're disagreeing. It's not about what it is, it's about why I justify it in my head. Create new words and phrases, and this is a hard one. When we're collaborating, especially on something very complex, make up a word. If we agree on something that a word doesn't exist, make it up. We're talking about the imagination, right? We can do anything we want. Make up a word and define it so everybody in that collaboration, regardless of which of those four imaginaries that they're coming from, understands that concept, because they were all part and parcel in developing that concept, and then build off of that. So don't be afraid to make up words. Now, I also come from a place that is very conflicted on the environment, right? So maybe when you go back home, you're not as conflicted and this doesn't mean as much to you. But this will help in your collaborations. Let's go on to the next one. On the top, we see three things added up to a green check. On the bottom, added up to a red X. Those three things on the top, the one on the left suggests treat us as part of our environments, not as separate from our environment. This is about what Wallace Stegner was saying. What we want to do is we want to make sure we're going outside and collaborating outside as a person and an environment, instead of in a room with walls and we're removed from our environment. The one in the center with Lady Justice peeking out behind the blindfold, don't blind ourselves to power imbalance. We need to recognize power imbalance, just as that slide before with the triangles, right? We need to recognize power imbalance and know when one imaginary is overriding the other without an explicit discussion of why. And we need to be open to sharing stories and telling our experiences in ways that maybe are not able to be quantified. Maybe we're not able to do the math or build a model to explain what the sagebrush ecosystem is. But people out there who don't have that technical expertise still know a lot about it, and we need to listen to their stories instead of just making it black and white. We need to really engage and have a robust vision of how these people are thinking about. And if we do this, then we get good collaboration. So let's go on to the next slide, and what are our lessons from this? Recognize power dynamics and reflect often. We have to recognize power dynamics. Know when someone's not talking. Know when someone's being steamrolled. We have to think about this all the time, or else the collaboration is dead from the get-go. Go outside. Stop doing your collaborative meetings, especially at the beginning when you're trying to connect. Stop doing them inside, indoors, at a table. Go outside. Field tours. We've talked about field tours just 20 minutes ago. Field tours, field tours, field tours. Engage people in their environment. Just like the imagination is not just a mental game, it's a mental and physical game. Collaboration is not just a mental game, it's a mental and a physical game. Engage them. In fact, the etymology of collaboration is co-labor. That's Latin, comes from Latin, and that means literally to work together with your body. It doesn't mean to think together, it means to work together. That's what collaboration is, and you need to engage your body in collaboration, not just your mind. Get comfortable with value-laden descriptions. And a lot of groups I work with are uncomfortable with this because it's hard to quantify, it's hard to manage. Like, people's values are all over the board. Tough luck. Get comfortable with that, because unless we're sitting there actually paying attention to people's values, we will never be able to collaborate. And tell stories and use metaphors. These are extremely powerful. Stories are powerful. They are more powerful than any science out there. A good story is much more powerful. Use stories, use metaphors. When you can't figure out exactly how to get your point across, go to a story. Let's go to the next slide. And let's back up for a second. What I'm saying is not just about collaboration, because collaboration is this kind of abstract idea. I'm talking about you being collaborators. You being collaborators in this room, going back and collaborating. And to do that, we need to do a few things ourselves. We need to think about fences too much. Mine's fences, everyone has something else. Don't be afraid to think about that and be weird about it and imagine it in a different way, because that's how we come up with new solutions that no one ever thought of. We have to imagine a different way. Number two, try to imagine what you cannot imagine. It's a weird kind of philosophical thought. How can I imagine what I cannot imagine? But try. Just the process of imagining what you cannot imagine, you will find solutions that you never even knew existed. Be wrong. Just because I view this thing this way doesn't mean everyone views this thing this way. I have to be open to be wrong in collaboration. I have to be open to being wrong. Build something together, engage your bodies, tell stories, and be the West that the West needs. And that last one on the next slide, I'll tell you what that means. There's just one quote and then we're done here. Daniel Chemist in This Sovereign Land. Be the West that the West needs. The American West had always been seen as a unique region of the country and had played a central role in America's national imagination and self-conception. As the region has steadily built a stronger sense of its own identity, it has also at last begun to outgrow its political infancy by developing a genuinely Western way of dealing with Western issues. Be the West that the West needs, and what that is, if we look at Stegner and Chemist combined, it's collaboration. We really need to think about collaboration. It's the way that we are going to make the West develop outside of its political infancy. And with that, thank you for inviting me. It's been a privilege.